My name is Skylar, and I'm 32 years old. As I sit here in my dimly lit bedroom, I find it hard to believe how quickly life can change. Outside my window, the world is quiet, sunlight dripping gently through the sheer curtains, dust floating like forgotten dreams. But inside me, a storm brews. A mixture of love, loss, and betrayal wraps tightly around every memory of the life I once thought was mine. This house, with its cream-colored walls and soft carpeted floors, is more than just a home. It's a $750,000 piece of my soul. Calvin and I bought it after 3 years of scraping every penny from our long workdays and late-night sacrifices. We built it together, every corner painted with laughter, every shelf nailed in place with hope. Calvin. Even saying his name now feels like pressing on a bruise that never healed. We met in the most unremarkable way, waiting in line for coffee at a small cafe just off Main Street. I had just come from a client meeting, papers spilling from my overstuffed tote, and he stood behind me with a tired smile and gentle eyes. We both ordered the same drink. He made a joke about fate. I laughed. It was nothing. And then it became everything. What followed were quiet dinners, open-hearted walks in the park, shared secrets at 2 a.m., and a kind of love that made the world feel like it was finally tilted in the right direction. Calvin was the kind of man who never raised his voice, who always checked if I'd eaten, and who kissed my forehead like it was sacred ground. But my parents never saw him that way. Janet, my mother, said he wasn't polished enough. My father, Martin, thought he was too simple for a woman like me. When I told them I wanted to marry Calvin, they tried everything to stop me: emotional threats, guilt, even silence. But love doesn't wait for permission. We got married quietly, with a few close friends and a small cake. I wore a soft blue dress, and Calvin's hand trembled when he placed the ring on my finger. It was the happiest day of my life. A year later, I found out I was pregnant. Calvin lifted me off the ground in the kitchen, laughing through tears, spinning me around until I laughed too hard to breathe. We stayed up all night planning names, painting color palettes for the nursery, and wondering what our little one would be like. We agreed if it was a boy, we'd name him Jack. But fate, as always, has its own cruel timing. Just 4 days after we saw the first flutter of Jack's heartbeat on the ultrasound screen, Calvin left the house to grab groceries. I remember waving from the doorway, barefoot and smiling, telling him not to forget the vanilla ice cream I was craving. He winked and blew me a kiss. That was the last time I saw him alive. The phone rang 30 minutes later. A voice too calm for such news said his name. The words accident, instant, and I'm so sorry blurred together like a nightmare. I fell to the floor, clutching my stomach as if I could protect Jack from the heartbreak my body couldn't contain. The funeral came and went. I don't remember the prayers or the faces, or the coffin lowering into the ground. I only remember that my parents didn't offer to help, not once. No hand on my shoulder. No warm hug. Not even a single ride home. But something worse began to bloom the very next day. They started entering my home. Janet walked in like she'd always belonged here. Martin followed, muttering things about how the house was too big for one woman and how Brandon, my brother, would be needing space soon for his college plans. I didn't understand it then, but that was the first warning, the first shadow on the wall. They didn't come to grieve Calvin. They came to claim what was left of him, and what belonged to me. And so, I sat in the nursery Calvin and I once painted in moonlight, holding the hope that still lived inside me, whispering to the life growing stronger every day. I don't know how, little Jack, but I will protect you, even if it's from my own family. A month had passed since Calvin's funeral, and my world still moved like it was underwater. The grief hadn't gone away, it had just become quieter, hiding in the corners of every silent room. But through all of it, one thing had kept me going, the tiny kicks inside my belly. Jack. My son. My reason to breathe. I was in my 8th month of pregnancy, and for the first time in weeks, I wanted to feel joy again. So I planned something small. Just a baby shower with close friends, something intimate, soft, and mine. I woke up early that Saturday morning. The house smelled like fresh roses and vanilla frosting. I'd bake the cake myself, white with pink and gold swirls, and soft edible pearls lining the bottom. My back ached, but I didn't mind. Every single paper flower I'd pinned to the wall, every hand-folded napkin, every sparkling place card, it was all for Jack. And for me. For once, I wanted to be celebrated. By 2:15 p.m., I was adjusting the last piece of the linen table runner when the doorbell rang. Emily from my prenatal yoga class stood on the porch, holding a gift wrapped in blush pink paper. My first real guest, I said to myself with a flutter of nerves. "You look amazing," she smiled, hugging me gently around my bump. "The house is beautiful. Did you do all this yourself?" I nodded, warmth rising to my cheeks. "Yeah." It took a few weeks, but it kept my mind busy. Soon more friends arrived. Zoe, my business partner, brought cupcakes. Sarah from the neighborhood had balloons. Laughter filled the room. For the first time in months, I didn't feel broken. I wasn't the grieving widow or the woman barely holding things together. I was a mother-to-be, a host, a woman who still mattered. We were just about to cut the cake when the front door slammed open. I froze. Janet and Martin strode in, 45 minutes late, dressed like they were attending a business brunch. Martin carried a mysterious box, and Janet wore her usual fake smile and firmer-than-necessary heels expression. "Sorry we're late, honey," she said in a tone that made it sound like it was my fault. Traffic was terrible, but we have such exciting news. My stomach clenched. I knew that tone. I gestured toward the cake. We were just about to. "Special announcement," Martin boomed. The chatter stopped. My friends exchanged glances. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. And then he walked in. Brandon, my younger brother, holding up a letter like it was the Olympic torch. "I got in," he yelled, waving the letter overhead. "Princeton, baby." Janet burst into tears. The same woman who hadn't shed a single tear at her son-in-law's funeral was now sobbing over a college acceptance letter. "My brilliant boy," she cried, hugging Brandon tightly. "He did it. He's going to Princeton." Behind him came a wave of his friends, loud, dressed in orange and black, holding Princeton banners and phones, already snapping selfies in front of my decorations. They didn't even see the gift table as they knocked it over. No one noticed as the homemade banner I'd hung, "Welcome Baby Jack," got ripped down and replaced with a paper sign someone made on the spot, "Princeton bound." The party that was supposed to be about my son, about Calvin's legacy, about me, was now a college celebration for my brother. I backed away slowly, nausea rising in my throat. I escaped to the kitchen and tried to breathe. The sound of dishes clinking was the only thing grounding me. Someone touched my shoulder gently. "You okay?" a voice asked. But before I could answer, Brandon's voice boomed from the living room, launching into the story of his application, how he almost didn't get in, but knew he was Ivy League material. Of course he did. Back in the living room, someone stumbled into my cake table. The frosting I had so carefully piped hours ago splattered onto the floor. "Don't worry about it," Janet called casually from the sofa. "Just things. Just things." I knelt, despite the ache in my spine, and started blotting the mess with paper towels. No one helped. No one noticed I was 8 months pregnant, on my knees, cleaning frosting off the floor. "We always knew Brandon would make something of himself." Martin's voice boomed with pride. I stood slowly, one hand pressed to the wall, the ache in my heart heavier than the one in my back. They had taken my celebration. They had walked in, and in 1 hour, turned my baby shower into Brandon's victory parade. I slipped quietly into the nursery, the only space they hadn't invaded yet. I sat in the rocker Calvin had built with his own hands. I touched the crib. The walls were still soft blue. The memory of him still lingered here. I closed my eyes and whispered to the child inside me. "They don't see you, but I do. And I'll make sure they can't touch what matters most, not again." The house was silent again. The laughter was gone, the banners crumpled, the frosting dry on the floorboards. But I couldn't sleep. After everyone left, including Brandon and his cheering squad, my body ached, but my heart was vibrating with something worse than sadness. It was the feeling you get when something is breaking and no one else notices the sound. I sat at my desk, staring at the mess they'd left behind. A Princeton brochure sat on the counter, stuck to a smear of pink icing. My mom-to-be banner lay in a trash bag outside, soaked in soda. I reached for a glass of water, and that's when I noticed the envelope. Thick, cream-colored, tucked under a pile of mail. I hadn't seen it earlier. Curious, I opened it. Inside were a few printed receipts and a brochure from a Princeton prep agency. I froze. The receipts were for things like college application coaching, $4,200. Private SAT tutor, $2,800. Essay editing, $1,750. And, at the bottom of each one, my business account number. My hands trembled as I pulled open the desk drawer where I kept my files. Inside were bank statements I hadn't reviewed since Calvin's funeral. I spread them across the desk, highlighter in one hand, pain in my chest. Red flags were everywhere. Withdrawals I didn't authorize. Purchases I never made. Charges at designer stores where I'd never set foot. Transfers signed by Janet. Even the statement from the month Calvin died showed a large $3,000 payment for something called College Edge Solutions. My stomach turned. I wasn't just being ignored. I was being used. I shuffled through the drawer until my fingers hit something cold, a mason jar, tucked away behind old tax files. Inside was a yellowed receipt from 6 years ago. My first rent check. Back when I lived in a tiny apartment and slept on a futon. Also, I could pay off the credit card debt my parents claimed they accidentally put in my name. It wasn't accidental. None of it had ever been. Tucked beneath the jar were printed invoices from the past year. Tutoring for Brandon. Editing services. Application fees. All in my name. They'd called my business Q-Crafts. But they had no problem draining it to fund their version of success. My phone buzzed. Emily, how are you feeling after yesterday? Before I could reply, another notification came in. Dr. Kim, blood pressure concerns from last visit. Can you come in this week? And then a third ping in email. Victoria, family attorney. Let me know if you need legal advice about your situation. I've seen this before. You're not alone. I stared at those last 3 words. You're not alone. But that wasn't how I felt. Not in this house, not in this family. Just then, the floor creaked. I turned. Sweetheart. Janet's voice dripped with artificial sweetness as she stepped into the room, arms folded like a judge already giving a verdict. Brandon's friends will need a place to stay this summer. Behind her, Martin leaned against the hallway wall. And we'll need the nursery for storage. Just Brandon's things, you understand. Their voices bounced around the house like they belonged to it. But this wasn't their house. This was my house. Mine and Calvin's. Built with sacrifice. Held together with dreams. They were slowly trying to take it all. My home. My business. My joy. My motherhood. The baby kicked hard, as if he felt my rising fury. I sat down at the desk and opened my laptop. Slowly, methodically, I started looking up eviction notice templates. Not for tenants. For invaders. The printer hummed to life as it spit out 3 crisp pages. Each one was weighed down with 34 years of manipulation and betrayal. This isn't just about me anymore, I whispered, hand resting protectively on my belly. This is about Jack. And he's going to have a mother who fights. Tomorrow I would serve them. Tonight I would prepare. The morning after I printed the eviction notices, I woke up early. The house was unnaturally quiet, too quiet, like the calm before a tornado. I tucked the documents into my purse and padded barefoot into the kitchen, still in my robe, the baby shifting heavily inside me with each step. By the sink sat a half-empty mug of coffee, Martin's. A Princeton hoodie was thrown over the back of my dining chair, Brandon's. And 3 pairs of muddy sneakers lined the hallway by the stairs, not mine. I took a deep breath and followed the noise. Brandon and 2 of his friends were in the living room, sprawled on the couches I bought, eating cereal from my wedding china and laughing at a video on someone's phone. They didn't even look up when I entered. Morning, I said quietly, my hand instinctively resting on my back to ease the strain. 8 months of pregnancy felt like walking with a boulder in your spine. Brandon gave a lazy nod. We're thinking of setting up the Xbox in the nursery. Better sound there. I blinked. The nursery? He shrugged. Yeah, Dad said we could use it for the summer. Just until I leave for school. My pulse thudded in my ears. That was the room Calvin and I had painted together. The crib we assembled. The tiny blue bookshelf. The mobile he hung by hand. That room was ours. Brandon, I said, you can't. Skylar. Janet's voice cut through the air like a knife as she marched in behind me. She had a clipboard in one hand and a set of keys in the other. We've made a few adjustments to the household schedule, she said briskly. With Brandon preparing for Princeton, we need structure. You've been emotional lately. Unpredictable. It's best if you give the boys space. Martin followed, hands in his pockets, pretending to be neutral. We just want what's best for everyone. I opened my mouth to protest, but then Janet said it. You can stay at Emily's for a while. Just until the baby comes. This house is too stressful for you. My hands trembled. This is my house. Janet sighed dramatically. It was Calvin's house. We helped you with the down payment, don't forget. You didn't, I snapped. Calvin and I paid every dollar ourselves. You never gave a cent. Janet's smile went cold. Don't raise your voice, Skylar. You're not thinking clearly. I'm pregnant, I said, my voice shaking. Not stupid. Martin's voice rose behind her. That's enough. You've been difficult for months. You don't work as much. You expect sympathy. You're becoming a burden. And then he stepped forward and grabbed my arm. It wasn't a hard grip, but it was enough. Enough to make my breath catch. Enough to make Brandon and his friends fall silent. Enough to push me closer to the edge I didn't know I was standing on. Let go of me, I said, my voice now steel. But he didn't. Instead, Janet walked forward and grabbed my purse from the kitchen counter. What's this? She asked sweetly, pulling out the eviction notices. She read one, her lips curling as she scanned the bold letters. Termination of residency? Really, Skylar? She tore it in half and threw the pieces on the floor. And then, without a single warning, Martin shoved me, hard, toward the front door. I stumbled backward, the baby shifting painfully as I tried to catch myself on the wall. You're making this ugly, he said sharply. We gave you every chance to be part of this family. But if you won't support Brandon's future, then you can leave. He opened the front door. I stood frozen, 8 months pregnant, heart racing, hands shaking. You want me out? I whispered. Now. Janet crossed her arms. You've been asking for it. And just like that, they forced me out of my own home. No shoes. No coat. Just me, my son inside me, and the keys I still gripped like they were a weapon. I walked down the front steps slowly, tears stinging my eyes, not from weakness, but from rage. I sat in my car, one hand on the steering wheel, one on my belly, as Jack shifted inside me, like he knew everything had changed. They pushed us out, I whispered to him, but they have no idea what's coming next. Because tomorrow, I wouldn't just be the pregnant woman they discarded. I'd be the plaintiff, the fighter, the one who finally said enough. The sun hadn't even risen yet, but I was already dressed and sitting in the small office of Victoria Bennett, the family attorney Emily had connected me with. Her firm specialized in property disputes, family fraud, and something she called paper-cut wounds that bleed people dry. She pushed her glasses up her nose and looked at me with calm, sharp eyes. You said you've lived in the house since purchasing it with your late husband? I nodded. 3 years. Every mortgage payment made by me or Calvin. No cosigners. It's our house. My house. Victoria opened a leather-bound folder. You have the deed? I pulled it out from my purse, one of the few things I managed to grab before Martin shoved me out the door. Right here. Both our names. No one else's. She smiled faintly. That's a good start. I spent the next hour telling her everything. How my parents never accepted Calvin, how they barely attended the funeral, how they started showing up uninvited, slowly making themselves at home, and finally, how they forced me out. Victoria didn't interrupt once. She just took notes. Quietly, efficiently. When I finished, she asked, "Do you have any record of financial misuse?" I opened the other envelope. Bank statements, credit card reports, photocopied receipts for Brandon's prep courses, authorization signatures that clearly weren't mine. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "This isn't just abuse, Skylar. This is financial exploitation, identity misuse, and wrongful eviction. All of it documented." I swallowed hard. I want them out of my life. Legally. Permanently. "You'll have it," she said. "We're filing for full ownership protection of the property, legal injunctions for forced entry, and civil claims for financial damage." Her voice was calm, but steady, like steel under velvet. She continued, "Do not go back to the house without me or police presence. Change your business passwords. Secure your accounts. And tell your doctor to begin documenting stress-related symptoms." I nodded. He already started. "Blood pressure's been elevated for weeks." "Good," she said, tapping her pen. "The court doesn't just respond to broken bones. They respond to paper trails. And Skylar, you've got a forest." That night, I went back to Emily's guest room and opened my laptop. I changed every password, set up two-factor authentication, and backed up all business files to an encrypted drive. Then, I created a folder labeled Legal Case Martin, Janet, and Brandon. Inside it, I placed screenshots of their unauthorized logins, voicemail transcripts of Brandon's insults, photos of the nursery before and after the party, email records from Zoe showing sudden changes to our client database, my OBGYN's notes about pregnancy stress and high blood pressure, and one special photo, Calvin and me in front of the nursery, smiling, with paint on our cheeks. "This is for us," I whispered to the screen. "For you and for Jack." 2 days later, Victoria filed our case at the county courthouse. Claim 1, wrongful eviction. Claim 2, unauthorized use of business funds. Claim 3, financial identity misuse. Claim 4, emotional distress during pregnancy. Claim 5, property entry without consent. Each claim backed by pages of documents. We requested full legal control of the home, compensation for all financial losses, permanent restraining orders against all three, and a court-enforced eviction order from my house. That evening, my phone buzzed. "Zoe, they tried to send emails again from your old business login." I shut it down. "Want me to testify?" "Emily, your story isn't over. You're just getting started. Dr. Kim will support you with every note and health report you need." I exhaled slowly, feeling the fear in my chest melt just enough to let something else in, resolve. They thought throwing me out would break me. They didn't realize they were waking up the side of me I had buried for years, the side that knew my worth and wasn't afraid anymore. "You stole my baby shower, my business, and my peace," I whispered aloud. "But now, I'm taking everything back. Legally. Permanently." The courthouse smelled like wood polish and silence. I walked through the tall glass doors in a navy maternity dress, my shoes soft-soled to ease the pressure on my swollen feet. But my posture? Straight. My jaw? Steady. I wasn't here for drama. I was here for justice. The courtroom wasn't what I expected. Fewer people, smaller benches, but more tension than any room I'd ever entered. At the plaintiff's table sat me and Victoria, calm and organized. On the other side, my parents, Janet and Martin, flanked by Brandon. All three looked like they were attending a church service, dressed in pastel tones, faces blank with feigned concern. Judge Harris entered, a firm, middle-aged woman with no time for theatrics. Victoria opened with precision. She laid out the house deed with Calvin's and my names, presented records of my business accounts, showed screenshots of unauthorized access, and then the surveillance footage I had gathered from my home office. Janet and Martin's faces changed the moment the video was played. There they were, caught at 2:47 a.m. on hidden camera. Janet rifling through my filing cabinet. Martin whispering, Look for anything with account numbers. Brandon laughing from the hallway. She won't even notice. The judge didn't flinch. She simply nodded for the next piece of evidence. Victoria handed over a folder containing Zoe's email statement detailing false messages sent to clients. Emily's witness note describing how I was forced out. A notarized copy of my OBGYN's report. Patient experienced elevated blood pressure due to continuous family-related harassment during final trimester. Brandon shifted in his chair. Martin avoided eye contact. Janet clutched a tissue like it was the only thing holding her together. When it was their turn to speak, the show began. My daughter has always been emotional, Janet said, dabbing her eyes. We were just trying to help her raise the baby. It's all been a misunderstanding. Skylar was unstable, Martin added. She pushed us away. We had no choice but to step in. Judge Harris raised an eyebrow. You shoved your 8-month pregnant daughter out of her home and signed her name on financial documents. That doesn't sound like help. That sounds like fraud. Janet's tears stopped. Martin went red. Then Brandon made the fatal mistake. I didn't know it was her account, he snapped. Dad told me it was fine. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Harris looked at him flatly. So, you're admitting the account was not yours, and that you benefited from its use knowingly. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Victoria turned to the judge. Your Honor, my client is not only seeking full protection of her property and business, but permanent removal of these individuals from her financial life and physical residence. There was a pause. Then the ruling came. The court hereby grants full and sole ownership of the property to Skylar Evans. A no-contact and no-entry order is imposed on Janet and Martin Evans, as well as Brandon Evans. Financial restitution of $42,500 will be paid to Skylar for the unauthorized use of her business funds. All 3 defendants are ordered to attend court-mandated financial ethics counseling. Violation of these terms will result in criminal prosecution. I exhaled. Not in relief, but in release. 12 weeks of tension drained from my body in a single breath. Janet gasped. Martin stood like he'd been punched. Brandon slammed his folder shut. But I didn't look at them. I looked at the judge. I looked at Victoria. I looked at the future. That evening, back at Emily's house, I stood in front of the mirror and placed my hands gently on my belly. Jack, I whispered. We did it. Mommy kept her promise. The front door creaked as I pushed it open, keys trembling slightly in my hand, not from fear, but from something else, something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. I stepped inside slowly, eyes adjusting to the soft glow that poured in from the kitchen window. The air smelled faintly of lavender, the kind Calvin used to sprinkle in our laundry. The silence was no longer hollow. It was freeing. The house was mine again. Officially. Legally. Emotionally. Gone were the mud-stained shoes and Princeton posters. The misplaced books, the arguments, the manipulation. I stood in the middle of the living room and simply let myself exist there. For a moment, I just breathed. Zoe had already arranged for a cleaning service to come through the day before. Emily sent over some fresh groceries, and Victoria had emailed the final certified copy of the judgment. Every piece of evidence, every word I had spoken in that courtroom, had brought me back here. But what brought me forward was Jack. The very next morning, I felt it. A sharp shift. A tightening. Then a warm ache deep inside my back. It was time. Emily drove me to the hospital while I breathed through the contractions, her hand gripping mine as I whispered through the pain, "He's ready." And a few hours later, under soft lights and steady hands, surrounded by nurses who kept saying, "You've got this," I heard the only sound that truly mattered, Jack's first cry. They laid him on my chest, tiny and red-faced, his cries fierce and demanding. I laughed through tears, brushing his cheek with one trembling finger. "We're home, baby boy," I whispered. "You made it. We made it." Back at the house a few days later, I sat in the nursery, the one Calvin and I had painted together so long ago. Now it smelled of baby lotion and fresh dreams. Jack lay asleep in the crib, his little hand curled around the edge of a blue blanket stitched with his name. I had hung one framed photo above his crib. Calvin, holding a paintbrush, his face smudged with blue. His smile full of hope. My anchor in memory. Zoe visited the next day with cupcakes. Emily brought balloons. Dr. Kim stopped by just to check in, not as a doctor but as a friend. They didn't invade. They didn't take over. They celebrated. We held a small welcome home gathering, just us, just love. No banners. No loud cheers. No hijacked celebrations. Just the quiet warmth of real support. Zoe raised a glass of sparkling juice. To Skylar and Jack, she said, for teaching us what real strength looks like. Later that night, with Jack asleep and the lights dimmed, I sat by the window and opened my laptop. There, in my inbox, was a message from Victoria. Their appeal was denied. The court's ruling stands. They are permanently barred from contacting you or Jack. The house is officially in your name, unchallenged. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then whispered, "This house isn't just mine. It's safe now. Not just safe for me, but for the son who would grow up never needing to shrink himself for someone else's comfort." I walked to the nursery, leaned over the crib, and kissed Jack's forehead. "We're not broken anymore, little one," I said. "We're building something better, brick by brick." The morning sun filtered through the nursery window, casting a soft golden glow over scattered glitter, colored paper scraps, and tiny socks. On the kitchen table, a homemade birthday crown sat waiting, purple construction paper, silver sparkles, and crooked letters that read, "Jack is 4." I stood at the sink, drying the last of the cake pans as Jack bounded into the room, arms outstretched like a superhero, his feet barely touching the floor. "Mommy, I finished my card. Wanna see?" He beamed, waving a sheet of paper smeared with bold strokes of purple, stick figures, and a sun with an oversized smile. "It's perfect," I said, crouching to kiss his cheek. "Just like you." The house was alive again, but not with chaos. With warmth. With choice. The living room buzzed with soft laughter as my closest friends began arriving. Emily brought streamers. Zoe had a tray of mini sandwiches. Even Dr. Kim dropped in, no longer wearing a white coat, but holding a wrapped book for Jack and a bouquet of wildflowers for me. This wasn't just a birthday party. It was a milestone for both of us. Jack danced to a song playing from the kitchen speaker, his little legs wobbling with pride. He was strong, smart, kind, and completely untouched by the shadows that once haunted these walls. And me? I was no longer afraid to be seen. No longer holding my breath in my own home. After the party, when everyone had gone and Jack was fast asleep with his new toy truck clutched to his chest, I sat in the room that used to be my office. Now it was our shared craft room, filled with ribbons, paint jars, and framed magazine features from the business I rebuilt, Hearth and Hand Designs. Once a humble handmade decor brand, now a nationally recognized name with a foundation that supported women escaping toxic families. A letter sat by the coffee maker. I opened it gently. "Dear Skylar, I'm a single mother in Seattle. I read your story in Parents Magazine. I'm scared, but I want to leave. I don't want my son to grow up like this." I folded the letter and placed it in a wooden box beside several others. Each one was from a woman who had found hope through the path I cleared. Not just survival. Rebirth. That night, Jack tiptoed out of bed and climbed into my lap, his head resting against my chest. "Can we read the castle book, Mommy?" I smiled and picked up his favorite, the one about the brave princess who builds her own kingdom from rubble. As I read, Jack interrupted with the part he always remembered best. "Because real love builds things up, not tears them down," he declared proudly. I kissed his forehead and held him tighter. "You're right," I whispered. "Real love never asks you to be smaller." The silver streamer Jack had taped above the kitchen window still hung slightly crooked. I left it exactly as he'd placed it, imperfect, beautiful, and entirely his own. Just like the life we'd built. One step, one battle, one moment of courage at a time. Thank you for watching this powerful story of courage, betrayal, and justice. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more true-to-life stories that matter. See you in the next one.